All right, so let's say we are done texturing and making a material. Now we want to export our textures out for a different software, or we want to render inside Substance Painter. So let's go about exporting first. If I go over to my file and down below we have export textures, you can use the shortcut which is Control plus Shift plus E. Let's click on it. This gives us the export document window. So the first thing which we have is where you want to save your textures out. You can click on it and describe the folder and click on select folder to finalize it. On the right side, we have our file format. You can pick from any of these file format which we have. For our game purpose, we are going to stick with Targa for all the time. You see, we have dilation here as well. This is going to do the same thing as the dilation it did for our baking, but this is going to do the dilation for the final output. By default, it's set for 16. If I click on it, I have different option. No padding, which is not going to give us any dilation. Dilation infinite, it's going to keep on dilating stuff. Dilation plus transparent, it's going to dilate a bit, then it's going to make it transparent. And these guys, you can hover over this menu and it's going to show you what these paddings are going to do. On top of that, we have our config. So if I click on it, we have all of these template made by Substance as an exporting one. So I can export it either for V-Ray or V-Ray Udemy. I can export it for Unreal, Unity. I can export as a spec gloss. I can export it for Keyshot or CryEngine or other thing that Substances provide. So if I pick in the default one, which we had, and if I click here, right next to our low robot texture set, it's going to show us every map it is going to export out. If I close it, right here, we have the list of texture sets, which we are exporting the textures of. You can uncheck and check it again. So it's going to export or not going to export. Right here, we are going to describe what resolution our textures will be, either 4K or 8K or 2K or 1K. 8K is still experimental in Substance, so it's not recommended to use it. So let's stick with 4K. We are not exporting our water drops. So if I click on this again, we have padding settings again. So this is going to be a specific padding settings for different texture set if you want to assign any. Let's minimize this again. And if we hit on export, it's going to export our textures. It's going to take some time to export it out, but once it's done, we can open the folder and find those textures in our disk. Okay, so it's exported now. Let's say we want to make our custom export templates. So if I go back to File, Export Textures, there's no setting if I just want to export a base color. There is, which I created afterwards. But let's say if we just want to export a normal map or a metal map, we don't have any specific template for that. Every time we have to go in and export all of these out and delete it and just keep the metal map. You are never going to use metal map just on its own, but it's for an example. If you want to export just a single map, but not all of these, we can make a custom template for that. So if I come over to configuration, we have all of these templates, which we had right here. So let's go to configuration. You can click on any, duplicate it, and start that as a starting point. We are going to go in and add a new one. Let's name it normal map export. We want to define what kind of texture we are exporting, either a gray map, either a RGB, either a R plus G plus P, or RGB with an alpha channel, or everything separate. So let's export out an RGB map. That's our normal map. So we have the name structure of our map. We can define some name structure for it just by clicking on this dollar sign. So it's going to be dollar project, which basically means it's going to name our project first, whatever name which we have for our project. Mesh, it's going to use the name of the mesh or texture set. Let's keep it a texture set. Let's get rid of RGB. Let's make it underscore normal DirectX. So every time we export, it's going to first name our texture set underscore normal DirectX. To assign a normal map to this, we have to go to our converted maps. You can use any of these maps and just drag and drop it here to use it. Right now, we're going to use a normal DirectX. So if I drag and drop this guy, We're going to use a RGB channel. Now, if I close this guy and go back to our export, you have to close it to save your configuration. So if we go down, we can see our normal map export somewhere. Oh, there it is. Now, if I click on it, it's only going to export our normal DirectX. I should fix the name, but that's how you make your own template if you want to use it. So that covers about exporting. Let's go over and look rendering inside Substance Painter. So let's close this guy. So rendering inside Painter is super easy. All you have to do is click on this icon and then it starts to render. So we are using an Iray render inside Substance. Although it's pretty fast, it is not an actual game engine or a real-time engine. So just rendering inside Iray does not qualify for a game art piece or texturing. We obviously are going to cover how to export it out and present it inside a proper engine. But right now we are just going to render it inside Iray. Iray is actually going to render out our piece and take its time. So let's go over settings. The viewport settings is going to be the same. On the right, we have settings like pause Iray rendering. This pauses as the name suggests. Minimum samples and maximum samples and maximum time. So Iray, whatever value you have put here, Iray is gonna keep on rendering till it hits one of these values, either 1000 max samples or 60 seconds time. The more samples, the better your rendering quality is gonna be, but it's gonna take longer time. So let's say if you have an hour or two to render it out, you can just go in and make it hours, put 2 in there, and make your max samples completely maxed out. So Iray will keep on rendering for 2 hours until it hits this point, but it's gonna take a really long time too. I'm not sure if we can put in more values. It seems like we can. So it's gonna keep on going till it reaches 20,000 samples or 2 hours limit. We're just gonna go and keep it at 60 seconds for now, just a minute. We're gonna keep our caustic sampler off and Firefly filter enabled on. Override viewport resolution is gonna change the resolution for your render. By that I mean right now our viewport resolution. So I have a 1920 by 1080 monitor and the viewport resolution is 1920 and 1200 by default. Not by default, but right now. So we can override this and give it a custom value. And it's going to render out that resolution. Down below, we have save render and share. They're going to do as they say. Let's go to our display settings and talk about that. So display setting, most of the settings are the same as the one which we had on the viewport, like environment exposure, environment rotation. You can do the same thing just by shift, right clicking and dragging. Shadow is on for Iray by default. If we scroll down, we have a new tab which is called Dome. So the dome type changes what kind of HDRI we are using, either an infinite plane, a sphere, or a sphere with a ground. A sphere with a ground is going to give us shadows in our HDRI, so let's keep it. Down below, we can change the radius and texture scale of our HDRI. The clear color get rid of our HDRI from the background and gives us a clear color. I'm just going to make it a bit darker. On ground, we have settings like reflectivity. So if I zoom out, we have a ground which is rendering shadows. But if I make our reflectivity pure white, it's going to try to reflect our robot down. And if I change our glossiness to completely 1, you're going to see our robot is being reflected on like it's standing on a mirror. So let's keep our glossiness to a bit somewhere like here. So our model looks a bit more grounded. Shadow intensity changes the intensity of your shadow in the ground. And visible from below changes if we are going to see our model from below or not. Let's keep it off. I don't know why it's there. Camera settings are going to be the same. You can change your field of view, focus distance and everything. By default, we have an array depth of field on, so we don't have to use a depth of field in post effect. So let me change some settings to get a depth of field effect. So let's say something like this. And we can still go in and add some active post effects. If you enable depth of effect here, it's going to disable array depth of effect, which I don't recommend. Under vignette, let's just add some darkness around the borders. Let's scroll down. Anti-aliasing should not be an issue for iRay render, as it's gonna keep on rendering and update till it hits the point. Then you can activate your color profile if you want to use any. Down below, we have the same settings as the last time. Under shader settings, we have like emissive intensity and settings related to refraction. I can change the index of refraction here. We're gonna keep these things at default for now. So that covers the settings which we have for rendering inside Substance. So let's just go in, get a nice shot, move our camera and export the render out. So let's render this out for maybe 5 minutes. So I paused it to save some time. Let's say we are happy with our render. Let's go to save render and export it out and name anything. You're gonna export it to a folder you prefer and save it. All right, so that's how you're gonna render things inside Substance. If you want to play more with it, just go in, get more render shots, have some shots from different angle. It's all up to you.